Sometimes I go there and I think I move it.
That's what I heard from somebody that went there. They just belong.
Maybe, or maybe it's just kind of in the middle.
Where's our staff man? Who? The new guy.
You're the wrong
You
chair.
guys? You didn't recognize you.
I learned a lot in those years.
Yeah,
He's
not
usually
he's
hiding
not
over
behind
there.
the camera.
No.
You know, we've had to switch Hayden over to.
We had an intensive training program for Hayden,
Yeah.
what, about 3:15? Yep.
All right, it's 4 o'clock. Let's call the Grand Marais Planning Commission meeting to order, April 30th, 2018. All the members are present. And just to let everybody know that there is still a vacancy on the Planning Commission, so anybody that's here, or you know anybody that might be interested, or anybody that's watching, we've been trying to seek a full Planning Commission for quite a while.
Compensation.
Oh, it's
Personal satisfaction.
It's
You get to be with us. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Karma points?
Yeah, huge benefit. Yeah. So with that, do we have any additions or changes to the agenda?
If not, I'll make a motion to approve the agenda and move forward.
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded to adopt the agenda as presented. All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed. The agenda is adopted. We have the minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any additions or corrections?
I'll make a motion for the approval.
I'll second it.
Motion has been made and seconded to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. We have two public hearings today. First is a conditional use permit request. Carolyn Dry is requesting a conditional use permit to operate an engineering, research, and testing business in a detached garage on a property zoned R2 multifamily residential located at 406 2nd Avenue East. The workers in the business would all reside in the existing multifamily house on the premises. Public hearing, so if there's anybody here that would like to offer any comments, step up and identify yourself if you could.
You want me to come to the mic?
To the mic, so, because we have a camera here and.
wow. I,
You can go first.
okay, I didn't see you there. Okay, good. So I had questions since this house is directly next to ours. And I emailed Carolyn, and I'll submit her answer to my most pressing question. And I asked about noxious fumes and smoke, and she says, the small business in the garage will be neighborhood friendly in every way you can mean. I give assurance there will be no noxious fumes or smoke at all. I have done this invention work since 1989 and have never changed, have never had any complaints of any kind. I expect you will not hear or notice anything from us except our presence. Please do feel free to question further. And she hopes to go forward, so I'll just submit this to you.
Okay. give it a
Everybody
comment.
knows Mary Sanders,
Yes.
right?
Mary.
Oh, didn't I introduce myself?
Thank you, Mary.
I'm Tom McCann, and I own the property adjacent to Carolyn Dry's property. It's just to the north, and it's bare land. We don't have any buildings there. But I have no objections to her performing this type of activity within that garage. I've questioned Carolyn about what she's going to be doing. I had the same concerns as Mary. Is there going to be noise? Is there going to be smoke? Is there going to be any hazardous chemicals? And none of that's going to exist. It's it's basically electronics, probably very similar to what St. John did with his TV repair place. And unless you knew about that, you probably would never know about it. So I have no objections. I think it's a good thing for the city to facilitate what her plans are, is that if it's successful and things go well, she needs to find another space somewhere in the county. She needs a pole building. She's going to move it there, but she wants to get started. She gets interns from the materials engineering degree program at Winona State, and they're going to be living in her house with her. And I think it's going to work out just fine, so I'm pretty comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Yeah, Doug Sanders, 404 Second Avenue, right next to Cleveland, very my way, probably talked. Carolyn is a composite materials engineer, concrete walls that can repair themselves, airplane wings that can repair themselves. She'll be doing some work with 3D printers. That's what I want to emphasize. Up at the school, there's 4 3D printers, and the robotics club competes with other schools, and they get these kits to put together their 8-foot robot, and they're required by the corporate contributors of the kits. Like they're required, the club members, to make some of the parts for their 8-foot robot out of the 3D printers. And I've seen them using these 3D printers up there, and they're harmless. They don't jump out at you, and the materials don't have any offensive odor. And it's pretty exciting technology. And right here in our large geographic county, but not all that many people, we've got so many exciting things going on. I think this is pretty exciting that we have a composite materials engineer wanting to retire up here, but still conduct some experiments with her peers there, and we're pretty happy to see her right in our neighborhood. So, of course, I'm all for it. That's it.
Thanks, Doug. Kathy?
Hi, I'm Kathy Rice. I think everybody knows me. I've known Carolyn first as a customer and then as a friend at the Pie Place for 15 years. And I had the privilege of editing one of her books, and oh my gosh, this is a brilliant person. I mean, I did the best I could, but a lot of it, even with a science medical background, I didn't grasp. But Doug has talked to you about some of the things that she's done in terms of repairing concrete and things like that. Part of what Carolyn has done specifically with our family, we've been in a prison outreach. We've had a prison outreach program for 20 years. We have a nonprofit, and Carolyn has contributed to our nonprofit, but I told her some of the work I was doing, she was doing, we were doing, and she said, I'm going to help you with that. And we now have trees, orchards in every prison in Minnesota. And she's gone into other prisons in Wisconsin and Michigan. I mean, she's incredible. So part of her focus is we got to get more oxygen into the air, and we've got to take CO2 out. Trees will do that. Let's plant trees. And the orchard that is between GES and the jail was pretty much, it's been a community thing, but that was Carolyn's financial impact to the community and her help there. So she's, from a character perspective, she's trustworthy and true, and she's already brought a lot of really great things to the community. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Ed?
My name is Ed Bolstead. I live across the street from this issue. I'm going to have to oppose it. This is a residential area. We have lots of good things this lady has done, but it has not the impact on my home and others around us for parking, whatever else there might come up with this. This is a residential area, so I'm not in favor of this at all. I don't disagree with all the fine things that the lady's doing, but it really has nothing to do, in my view, with the quality of life of a residential area. The other thing I worry about is, and I'm not sure of my understanding of this, but the lots to the north of me are all empty. I don't know if that's another thing that's coming up or not. But there's about 3 lots that have been there ever since I bought up there 20 years ago. If we change this zoning, what do we do about those for someone who comes in and has a bigger project on what are at least 3 lots empty now, been, as I said, all the time that I've been there? What does that zoning permission give that potential builder or buyer or seller of the property? So in the long and the short, despite what all of the good things are being done, they can be done somewhere else than in a residential area. And I would hope that we don't decide that we can slowly nip away at some of the things that keeps our neighborhoods as a neighborhood. And so for that reason, I appear in opposition to this. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Thank you. Anybody else?
Phyllis Olson is my name, and I've never done this before. And I'm doing it because lately I've just started paying real attention. And I just have the impression from doing that sometimes some things go through without enough forethought, and then it's too late or something. I live across the street from Carolyn, and she's very nice. I'm just meeting her. So she's very new to me. I didn't know her background. I thought of her as an artist because that's the first thing she shared. So I didn't know, and I'll read. I had this ready to print on my computer in a real nice language and everything, and then I couldn't make my computer print it. So, okay, questions for Carolyn. After the phone conversation last week, it became a concern to me that you will not be present on April 30th to respond to questions, because I knew some of our neighbors had questions, and like I said, I've never done this. Maybe it's common for the person appealing not to be here. I don't know. So, concerned that you would not be present. When you were searching for office space, because you had a conversation with me about that before, and I said, did you consider the business park? It seems more suitable. Because I never knew she was an engineer. She shared that just last week with me. So I just learned things last week and heard them for the very first time. So maybe you might get my perspective on having some concerns about it. When you were, okay, the office space thing. When you mentioned being an inventor, I wondered very much about the specific nature of your business. Recycle plastic bottles, she mentioned that, and that sounded sort of iffy, like chemicals or something, I don't know. Anyway, that was one thing she mentioned, and she also mentioned, I didn't know she was an inventor, that she's an inventor, and that she's working on a 3D printer. I'm no scientist, and I know a little about them and how much they're valuable for building things because you can be so accurate. I know very little, and I thought, oh, those are already going. So what's that about? So I was curious about it, and let's see. Oh, and the employees who would be present in Grand Marais for several weeks this summer, and Carolyn's had the house for a number of months, and she mostly hasn't been here. Of course, it's been winter, but she hasn't been here very much, and so I don't think she'll be a year-round person unless something really changes. The employees, she did mention some young people who would stay at her house and be here for a number of weeks. And I ask, how did you choose Grand Marais for whatever business is conducted in the office in your garage, as opposed to the place where your permanent home is? So I thought that's not a bad question. And I ended with, it's important to me to hear your responses. Perhaps this meeting can be rescheduled. My position today, April 30, is to be opposed to the variance because like I said, I didn't know anything, didn't know how many people were going to come, if anybody was going to come. And so if nobody had come, then I would have said, no, we should hear from her. So that was a concern of mine. There are clearly a lot of people here who are fine with it. But I thought as long as I gave it some thought, I've never done it, I'm trying to pay more attention, I'm going to show up and say something. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it, yes. Anybody else? Mary?
Hello. I'm Mary Somnus, the Executive Director of the Cook County Grand Marais EDA. Carolyn reached out to me in January, called me on the phone at my office, and said that she had purchased a home here in Grand Marais and she was interested in relocating her business. And as the EDA Director, that's right up my alley. So I told her that I would happily work with her and see what we could do to help make that happen. So she is also friends with Jim Wienanen, who many people know. She indicated to me that he had taken her around and shown her some potential locations around town. She had like 4 or 5 places right in the city limits, and for various reasons they didn't work. One of them is, I don't know what street it is, but there's like a Quonset hut over more to the west a little bit. That doesn't have water and sewer. The building would have been workable, but those things are required. She also talked to the realtor who has the hangar listed that's for sale up at the airport, and she contacted the owner of the hangar and wanted to make arrangements to lease that space, but it wouldn't work because the building is not, you can't control the environment within the building. It's apparently just a pole barn. It doesn't have insulation and heat and temperature controls and all that. We talked about the business park, and we ran into a challenge with the business park because she was looking for a place for her interns to work. And as you all know, in the business park we have some lots that are zoned for owner occupied, but not for employees to occupy. And Carolyn doesn't need another house because she already bought a house. So she has tried many, many avenues to find another location. I also suggested to her some places that are outside of Grand Marais, but in the preliminary stages, she's very interested in staying close in town and not have to be driving all over the place to do this work. So my understanding of what she wants to do this year is this is an experiment, if you will, to see if she can do some of the types of research that she does. It's not the big full-blown operation of her business, but she's going to do some projects, and she wants to see if the community will be accepting of her and what she does, and if she can actually have the functionality that she needs here, with internet and delivery of supplies coming in that she needs in the mail or the shipping that's available to us here. And her ultimate goal is to learn if this is a long-term possibility for her business, and if so, then I believe she would look forward to building something out of the neighborhood and not continue to function in her garage. So I don't know her like some of the neighbors that have spoken to you here today. Only from multiple telephone conversations, but so I can't give her a personal reference, but I can tell you that my interactions with her have been very professional and very conscientious, and I encourage you to give her deep consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else?
I forgot one thing. It's a written statement from another neighbor.
Step back up, sure.
Okay, and it's pretty short too. This is from David Hawkinson, who lives up above me. I'm at 405 East 2nd Avenue, and he's one house above. My name is Dave Hawkinson. My wife Kathy and I live across the street from Mrs. Dry's property. Our address is 411 2nd Avenue East. We are not able to attend today, so I've submitted a couple of questions. Could you explain, Ms. Dry, in more detail the research and engineering business you are seeking to operate, such as machinery needed, products used and developed, employees, vehicles coming and going, parking, trucks delivering and transporting, hours of operation, etc. Also, was this the reason for purchasing the house and property? Thank you, David Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hawkinson, I said his name wrong. Can you get a copy? Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, can we ask a question based on things we've heard here?
I'll let you ask the question. Sure, go ahead.
Well, my worry is that I didn't even mention this till it was brought up. Are we having students coming to this, which means more parking, more up and down the streets? Our street is a gentle city street, except at 4 o'clock when the bank's closing and everybody's down there trying to make the last minute deposit, or the other part of the day when they're trying to pick up money. It's a very quiet residential street. Parking, now I hear we're going to have students, we're going to have other things coming into this. I continue to feel this is not a site for an industrial, however small, however important it might be. This is not the site for it. I hope you'd agree.
Okay, thank you.
I can say that Carolyn did say that in May to July she would have 2 people with her, and then July and August she would have 3 people with her.
Mary, you got something?
Well, I would just like to counter something about the parking issue. Phyllis has a duplex across the street. She's had residents who have had like 3 or 4 cars, and what they do to solve this parking issue is park around on 3rd Street, not the avenue. And that's adjacent to us since we're on the corner lot. And that seems to kind of solve a parking issue for 3 or 4 extra cars. Well, at least 2 or 3. And Sheehan's have their business right there, their plow business, and they always have like a couple of pickups and a trailer. So I think parking on the avenue is an issue. But parking on the street around the corner, and you just have to walk a quarter block, would not be an issue.
Thank you. All right, we're going to close the public hearing portion and then open it up for Planning Commission discussion. Mike, is there anything that you want to add to this in terms of, beyond what the application states and maybe in reference to some of the questions that were asked that,
Yeah, let me read an email that Carolyn sent on Sunday that I think tried to address some of these potential questions. And she would have liked to have been here. She's not here because we've been messing around with the schedule of this meeting, and this is our 3rd attempt to get it scheduled, and we finally were able to. And I think she would have preferred to be here as well. So I'll just read what she wrote. If there are concerns of additional traffic, my operation is not open for public visits or customers. UPS and FedEx deliveries are not expected to be more than 1 or 2 deliveries a week. The small business in the garage will be neighborhood friendly in every way you can mean. I give assurance there will be no noxious fumes or smoke at all. I've done this invention work since 1989 and have never had any complaints of any kind. I expect you will not hear or notice anything from us except our presence. I was thinking of what else I could say. My first space for experiments was in an architecture classroom building for 14 years. When I was a professor in now Winona since 2013, for 5 years we're in an office building, and before that for 10 years above a warehouse, and in these places have never had any complaints. That's the extent of the additional details. And I already mentioned about the number of people that would be there. She offered that as well.
all right, I'll open up then the commission questions, comments. I think maybe before we start too, one of the things that we should do is make it clear what home occupation, what the definition is in our ordinance, so that everybody is familiar with that language. A home occupation is any use customarily conducted entirely within a dwelling or accessory building and carried on by members of a family residing therein, which is clearly incidental and secondary to the use of the dwelling for dwelling purposes and does not change the character thereof. Clinics, hospitals, lodging, mortuaries, motor vehicle repairing for hire, welding, animal hospitals, and the maintenance of animals shall not be deemed to be home occupation. So I think, just to be clear, that this is a use that needs to be conducted within a structure, needs to be conducted by residents of the premises, and that is clearly incidental to the primary use of the property as a residence. And finally, that it does not change the character of the property. Commissioners, any thoughts?
There's some.
Go ahead.
I was just waiting for
Please.
you. One of the topics that comes past us a lot these days tends to, or a lot of the challenges that we face tend to often come down to the same topic, which is protecting our residential housing for residential uses. This comes up a lot based on some of the challenges that we have. When I first saw this request, I thought, this looks really interesting, but I got a feeling this really interesting, potentially really attractive activity and valuable person is going to be on a collision course with our desire to protect our housing. And I want to make sure I understand what the use is going to be like. It sounds to me that she's not going to live there year-round. No one's living there year-round. It's a use that takes place perhaps in the summer mostly, both the residential use of the home and the pseudo-industrial business use of the garage. Is that correct?
What she's offered as a schedule is that it would be May through August, and potentially only this May through this August.
So for most of you, this formerly residential setting will not be in use. I don't
It's-
understand.
She owns it right now.
Correct.
It's going to continue to be used the way that she uses it right now.
So she lives there now?
She owns it right now. She owns it.
Okay. There was a sentence earlier about saying not really appreciating the business park opportunity because, if I heard it right, she didn't want to have an extra house. And I'm trying to understand, is there, she owns that now, so that would be the extra house if she had to also go into the business park.
Can I answer?
Well, I think the business park issue would only work if it was going to be the business by itself. It wouldn't work to house the employees there because the business park zoning requirements only allow the owner to live in that and work in that premises. So.
Well, a good case is the veterinary. We approved that, and he lives up above it. But it's strictly his business.
I mean, this is the same issue that any small business that was trying to start up here would face. It's not that there's no available space for her to use, it's that there's no cost-effective available space for her to use. If budget was no object, I'm sure she could find a space that she could use.
One thing I want to be clear about what's going through my head is I have no lack of respect for what she's doing. I absolutely value what she could possibly bring to this community, but I also want to make sure that we're consistent in our housing decisions. And we do have, I think, part of what she's saying, she really wants to make it work here. She really wants to blend into our community and make sure our community has the resources she needs and to have a good match. And I think part of that match is also understanding that we have a housing problem. And so is there something we can do to help? I mean, before I make any personal decision on this, is there more that we can do to help to find her a more ideal space that's not, well, she already owns it, but that's not in the residential setting. I kind of wish we'd been approached before any deal was struck, but I don't know how long has she been there.
Well, I mean, I think what you're talking about is two separate issues. One, the residential character and nature of the property, which is, I think she bought it to be her residence, you know, whether it's seasonal or retirement or some other fashion, that she bought it as a residence. And then with this possibility that she might conduct a business there, or she might conduct that business somewhere else, this would still be her residence. That's the take I have, although, I mean, one of the difficulties I have with this application is I don't know that we have all the details that, you know, if she was here, we might be able to flesh out and ask questions and maybe get some clear responses.
Yeah.
I'm a little uncertain in terms of the activity that she's going to be conducting there, the specifics of that. You know, I mean, it was generalized, and for the most part, we haven't required, in the past, when we've allowed a home business or a home occupation to be conducted, maybe the level of detail that maybe I'm thinking I'd like to understand a little bit better, just because of the nature of this business, engineering, inventing, using equipment, and you know, just how that works. You know, I don't really have a very clear picture of that, but I do know that we have allowed home occupations in the city, and for the most part, most of the home occupations, in fact, I think almost all the home occupations that we've permitted have been able to be conducted within that residential setting without anybody really noticing or seeing or being aware.
An example of that is the deal with the Cadwells. She has her hair studio above, and there's been no problems whatsoever with that. Doug, didn't you make a question about, maybe you could answer the question about the usage you were talking about?
I
Yeah.
think you should ask
Yeah.
ask Tom.
Okay.
Tom has great familiarity with.
Explain a little more about exactly what this entails here.
Well, it's a very small garage. I think it's just a single stall. And they'll set up some workbenches in there, and they'll use this 3D printer to make parts for a device, and they'll fit the device together and test the device. And apparently the device does not make noise, nor does it create smoke and noxious fumes. Exactly what the device is that she's trying to invent, you know, she's an inventor, she's playing that card pretty close. So if you can imagine, you know, taking a single stall garage, putting workbenches along the sides and the back, and setting up some computers with computer-aided design and one or two of these robotic printing machines. That's what's going to be going on in there. And the way that she set up the house is that the interns living in the downstairs area have access out the back door, which then they just walk over to their garage area to work. So the interchange between the personnel and the house, between the garage and the house, you know, probably something that you really wouldn't notice. So I think as far as activity, maybe the lights are going to be on in the garage late at night. I would suspect that she's going to have these younger people working quite a few hours. And so that might be the only noticeable change.
She could put a shade on the window.
And just one more thing too is, I don't know, I'm like Phyllis, I don't know how these things work, but Carolyn did give me a phone number, and I've got a cell phone, and if you would like to ask her questions, she said that she would answer that when I called her, and you guys could do that. Is that something that happens in a situation like this? Is that possible?
We can do whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I think we should continue our conversation. And
Yeah.
see if that's.
So at the end,
that's
if you have any specific questions that you want to ask Carolyn, I'd be glad to just dial her up on the cell phone and we could have a conversation with her.
Thanks, Tom.
I know what's proposed, but officially, the more we talk, the more this sounds worse. Now we have students living in the basement. Gonna track their way out the back door. I don't know anything more, but every time we get further into this, it's more of an infringement on the neighborhood. And for Hal to say that that project for the hairdressing salon was not controversial, you're not being accurate, Hal.
I just want to separate, maybe we have more than one discussion going on here, and one of them is, will this activity infringe on the peace and quiet of the neighborhood? That's one discussion. The other is, okay, what are we bringing into a residential neighborhood in its nature? We're bringing essentially a business into a residential neighborhood. Under a conditional use permit, that's largely designed for family businesses. And it seems to me a little gray that this property is sort of being targeted to kind of get up and running as a business for a couple months out of the year, as opposed to a family that perhaps lives there year-round and is making things in their garage for pleasure or profit. It just seems to me a slight stretch of the use of, or the intent of the conditional use permit. However, it's a really attractive concept that she's bringing, but I want to make sure we're consistent in the way we handle our housing issues, which are very immediate and very real in front of us. I haven't seen too many of these kinds of meetings where, if there's neighborhood resistance to a person wanting a conditional use permit or a variance for a change, where those get approved. I haven't seen that very often, but I could be wrong. Normally, if there's neighborhood resistance, it's really an uphill battle at that point. But you've been at way more of these than I have, and I imagine you guys have too. But so, at some point we have to listen, and there is some resistance here. So I'm going to leave it to you guys and just see what you have to say.
Yeah, just to comment on what you raised there. I mean, again, looking at the issue of this being a residential district, which it is. I mean,
Right.
It's primarily designed for use as residential character. The ordinance does provide an opportunity for a home occupation within the R1 and R2 districts, which we have granted to those uses we've deemed to be appropriate, and those that would fit within the definition of our ordinance. I don't recall any that we turned down that would have that definition over the years. So I think we need to be clear, when we're talking about this, what our ordinance allows and what it doesn't allow. And it doesn't allow a use that would clearly not be able to be conducted without notice by the neighbors, or that would change the character of the neighborhood, would change it from the primary use of as a residence, and turn it into a commercial use, because it's not the intent to give a permit for a conditional use permit for a home occupation to change the primary use of that property. I mean, I think
That's
what
important. Sorry. That's
well, I think what
primary use.
the primary use is a residence, and what I think I've read in this application is that the primary use of the property will still be the residence, that the incidental or secondary use of the property would be as a home occupation to conduct this engineering business, and
one piece that I feel kind of muddies the water is the relationship with the interns. Like that, I think it's more to like the family part of this. I mean, they don't have to be related, that's true.
that's right.
But that relationship is obviously, I mean, it says nonprofit here in our definition, and I'm not sure that that's accurate in this instance.
Yeah, and I think that would certainly be one of those questionable areas when you start to bring in people, and it's not necessarily the same people, well, whether that constitutes a family. Even though our definition of a family is broad,
Yeah.
is it that broad to encompass taking in?
But I mean, these interns are not there. I mean, they're getting something. There's a transaction going on there, so it's not as if, you know, they're just friends living with you for the summer. That would not be an accurate representation of what's going on.
Well, they're here for work.
Exactly.
But if you think about other business-owned employee housing that exists in the city,
Okay.
those people that reside there are paying rent to live there. The only reason they're living there is because of the job that they have, and yet it's still clearly residential in character. That doesn't mean that it's not deeply in the gray area on both of those questions about what's a family and what's a home occupation, but you've got an opportunity to make findings in either direction on this. I'd just be cautious to not offer a false choice here, that it's either this or some family, because that's not the choice that you're presented with right now. I mean, the choice you're presented with now is, she owns this property. Would you allow her to conduct this business in the garage with the characteristics she's described? Would you put any conditions on that use, or would you say no to that use? And there really isn't another path. And I think what you brought up earlier, Todd, about whether there are other things we can do to support this type of activity in the community is a great conversation to have, but not this one, right? It's not for tonight anyway.
You know, one of the thoughts that I have is, you know, whether or not we would, because of some of these questions, whether or not we would be able to do this on a temporary basis or a short-term basis and limit the term of the conditional use permit. You know, she's suggesting she wants to do this for this summer. Could we reevaluate to see how that worked and whether or not it
That's a pretty good idea.
met?
Is that something we could do?
Absolutely, that's something you could do. I don't even think that would be controversial to her. She's only implying her intent is to do this one summer. And if things work out, then that maybe means it's worth an investment in some other opportunity rather than in this garage. So I think it's within what her request is, even to say you can only do this for this fixed period of time.
This may be a solution, but I would also want to hear from the neighbors that are opposing it again. Would they be willing to consider this if we put a sunset on it after one summer? Not if it works or it doesn't work, but if we say
We've
do it for one summer.
approved conditional uses for hair salons, which brings traffic in and out substantially day in and day out. So how much traffic would this project, wouldn't be any, would it? I think
Well,
that's
it doesn't appear that there would be issues of traffic. I mean, I think a relevant question was asked was about parking, and if there's this thought that there would be three people working there, you'd potentially have 3 vehicles. Well, could that be conducted? I mean, could on-site parking be provided for those 3, or a combination of on-site and off-site parking accommodate that?
You have a site plan in your packet, and there are a lot of cars in this photo, so I think it gives you a pretty good scale as to what type of parking is available on the property itself rather than on the street nearby.
Seems like they could
Easily put
that.
3 in that driveway.
I mean, it appears that they could, you know, I mean, but even if they chose to park on the street, which they're public streets, anybody can choose to park on the street, and, you know, we don't restrict that.
Well, I go up and down that street all the time when I leave the post office, so I have never seen any congested traffic there.
In the sense that I don't,
I live there, Al, and I'll tell you different. I don't go up and down it, I live there.
I'm generally always on the side of making sure we consider parking, but to me, I still think there's a more important question, And it's not about having a false choice between whether this house would be used for this pseudo gray activity or for a family, which doesn't exist here at this time. For me, it's more about many decisions that could happen down the road, precedent setting, where it could affect our overall available housing stock for families. And so I guess my feeling is there a way of doing a very short-term approval? Well, so I think conditional permits by their nature are sort of...
It's what they're designed for, really.
Yeah.
But Mike, can we legally do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, then I think it's a good idea.
Because it's in her stated intent to just give it a shot, make sure the community supports this, and then to go look for something else. And it's in the intent that other people have reiterated. But I don't want to set a precedent that, again, I'm going to be a broken record. I don't want to threaten our R1 zones, our R2 zones, our residential zones. I just don't want to threaten them because there's more threats out there.
Yeah, so that I think that's been really clear with this commission for a couple of years now, that that's an important issue. And the idea of precedent setting, I don't really buy into as much. Here you are talking about this issue on its own merits. And we're not even talking about the fact that for the past 15 years we've never turned down somebody who's asked for a conditional use permit to do a home-based business. We just haven't. And it doesn't tie our hands to say yes to this one. We can still say no to this one because you have to take each of these cases on their own merits. And if there's something about a number of home-based businesses or a number of whatever use that we decide becomes a threat to that residential character, then I think it's incumbent on us to codify that, to say we're not going to allow this anymore, or we're only going to allow it if it's not within a certain distance of another one, to try and limit the number or something like that. I mean, as long as we are allowing it as a use, there's really nothing you can do to take care of that threat to the residential character that you're talking about. And in terms of precedent, if you say yes to this one, you can say no to the next one if it doesn't meet a reasonable test. And just to prove that point, I mean, you're thinking about yes or no to this one. You're not feeling locked in, I don't think, because of previous decisions.
In all of the previous home occupations that we've approved, what percentage of them have been year-round residents?
I don't know that we even know the answer to that question. We don't always ask that question.
It seems to me that most of them have, but I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, our ordinance makes no distinction between seasonal or year-round residency, whether it's homestead or non-homestead properties. You know, I mean, I think that's when we start to get into, I think, more precarious conversation, because you know, we've never created that distinction, nor I think have we wanted to create that distinction, unless there's an intent to want to change that. I think we'd be.
Yeah, and let me know if I shouldn't even be talking along this line, but we've created a business park specifically to attract this kind of use. And if it's cheaper to plunder homes in the residential zones, then why are they going to go to the business park? And how does this help our housing?
Well, I think the distinction, though, is that the type of use and activity that can be conducted in the business park is far different than what we would allow in a residential district as a home occupation.
Yeah, I mean, this particular request would put that to the test, in my opinion.
Well, if we have to change anything in the business park, we have to get a legislative approval, don't we, Mary? No? Okay.
No, I mean, I think the issue, though, is whether you're talking a single-car garage that's going to have some kind of activity in it that's going to be, in my mind, pretty small scale at this point. Now, maybe that changes, you know, as they do their work and they decide that they need more space, whether it's business park or some other location that suits their needs better. I mean, clearly this is still a residential neighborhood, and the residential use is the primary use of this property. You know, this use as a home occupation use has to be incidental and basically unobservable from
And I just need
the residents.
I need something clarified for me. The impression I got when reading this, which may be inaccurate, is that the property was recently purchased. Okay, so how do we know its primary use is residential?
that's what the ordinance requires.
Right,
Primary
but-
use is
But
residential.
what's demonstrated is
So-
that a building's been purchased and is now, this request is being made.
Yeah, what, I don't know,
Again,
I guess I would disagree that it's clearly, what Tim said, clearly
Yeah.
residential in character. Ask yourself how you might go about making a finding about that. And I think the way we would normally go about making a finding about its character is we'd look at the property and we'd say, this building people are living in. And, you know, not they're living in year-round or, you know, any other characteristic about it that we know. But there isn't any business going on inside of this building, the single-family home, the multifamily home that's on the property. That's normally how I think we would decide what character is predominant and what character is accessory, is we look at the amount of space being used. And I think it's pretty clear that the building that was residential before Carolyn bought it is going to continue to be residential now that she's purchased it, whether or not you grant this permission. To try to figure it out any other way, to go into the question of what her motivations were, would she have bought this if she knew for sure she couldn't do the business? It just becomes, we can't really do that, right?
Just my last point that I want to make is when people buy into a residential zone, they buy into it with certain expectations, and that it's going to be residential in character. And so we have to be careful that we keep that in mind and we guard that. But that being said, I guess I've turned out to be the person who's really defending the residential nature of this requirement, but I just want to make sure that we really give that the respect it deserves, especially with neighbors who aren't comfortable with it. Okay, all that being said, this sounds like a really exciting and interesting person and can bring something really fantastic here. So I'm hoping we can create something that still attracts people like this to our community. I believe technology is a way that Grand Marais can grow beyond just being a tourism economy. The times are changing with our connectivity and so forth, and doesn't involve heavy trucks coming back and forth, and it doesn't involve massive resources. So I think there's a great place for that. And maybe this is how we can begin to dip our toe in the pool, by finding people like this, and they know other people like that. So I'd like to find a way to-
definition here is that, does it change the character of the neighborhood?
Define character, you know. I think Mike was just
There's
doing that a
no
moment
people
ago.
coming in and out of it? Does it,
So-
maybe it would be, it's limited to the garage?
Can I throw this to the concerned neighbors? How would you feel about a very short term?
Is there anyone out in the audience other than who spoke that, like Pete, do you have an interest in
I'll
it?
put my mind out.
What?
I'm not gonna get in the middle of this one.
Wise man. So you don't want to sign up for the empty spot over here, do you?
Get to sit with
I
Hal.
would like to say that.
Is it right if I ask them?
That when my,
Go ahead, Phyllis.
Mary mentioned my renters, and they've been there for over 10 years. And they are leaving, and a family member of mine is moving in. We never had a lease, we had a very friendly thing, but anyway, the neighbor's a piano teacher, a good one. And let me tell you that besides their own family, you know, some grown adult kids, you know, who have cars and friends and all of that. Aside from that, there have been piano students coming and parking on the road at, you know, for 10 years. And sometimes I come home and somebody's in my little parking spot, which I'm sort of territorial about, but
Your
anyway,
off-road spot.
it is the fact that that family's moving, and I have family coming in, an adult child with a partner, and they'll just have a vehicle apiece, and there aren't going to be piano teachers. So I mean, I think maybe in that way, the parking might even appear to open up a bit to people who come and go. But the street is fragile. It is fragile. I would invite anybody at this meeting to come up on Second Avenue East, look particularly toward the top. I have a rain garden in front of mine, and the rain garden has helped with the erosion of the road, but if you come up, if you feel like it, look each side. You know, so there are others, just some structural delicacies about the road. And so, you know, great big trucks might have an impact, but on the other hand, in fairness, I wanted to say that I think the parking is going to change because there is going to be way less traffic at my house. So,
And her residents did considerably park around the corner. They had like 2 extra cars and they parked them around the corner, not on the avenue.
Well, I would hate to, we could make a decision based on driving around the block.
No. Oh, no, we can't, but it is, it's delicate, that road is delicate.
It's been a long time since we had a good.
Yeah,
it's quite a crowd.
In Carolyn's driveway, there's enough for at least 2 extra cars to park there. When Sheriff Eliason lived there, I mean, he had at
There were
least 2.
4. There were 4.
And there was, and they parked off-road, so.
Well, are there any other comments? You know,
Can I please just say there are 4 residents impacted and 3 of them do not like this program.
you've said it. Thank you. You've said it. Yes, I've heard it. Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, is anybody ready to make a motion?
Yeah.
Could I ask Mike, tell me about the limitations that could be placed, a time limitation?
There's no parameters about that. You can set any reasonable conditions you want.
And her current request is that she feels her evaluation period of doing this will be over by when?
She's talking
The end of
about
the summer.
August should be done.
Okay. If we put in a time limitation at that point, and she says, I really like it, but I like doing it here, does she have to reapply for a conditional use permit again?
You could certainly set it up that way. I think that would be reasonable.
Or, okay.
Because it might be nice to go through this process where we invite the neighbors back and hear their
And then she
perspective on
can
it
be
as
there,
well.
and we've
Yeah.
had this experience.
I guess, I would like to make a motion that it can be approved with that time deadline. However, if the neighbors are still opposed at that time, I don't know that I want to give us the option to approve it at that point. She's had her shot for what she asked for, and I'm concerned about larger topics, that go outside, that could branch beyond this, so.
Well, you're not going to be able
So
to tie.
second approval can't occur, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, you can't really tie a future decision's hands with this decision.
Unless you just put a time
You can just say
deadline on
it's
this.
it's done at the end of August.
Just a term,
Right.
certain term, and
And then she'll have to reapply it.
I mean, personally, I would like to offer a term that would end, maybe it's September 30th or something like that. I mean, I
Just to
don't know.
create a little buffer.
Well, I mean, to allow
Are
it
you comfortable
to.
with this idea? I mean, is
I would be comfortable with offering a conditional use permit to allow her to conduct this home business with a term that would expire the end of September, also requiring that they provide on-site parking, 3 on-site parking spaces.
Right on.
And
Would you
that-
amend your
that-
motion to that?
Tim's fleshing
I
it
don't
out.
think you made a
I don't
motion.
think I actually made a motion.
It sounded like he was maybe going to,
I was
but I don't
getting
think he did.
there, yeah.
You're spinning a little bit,
Yeah.
but.
But no, you're doing
And then
great.
the other would be that, to be assured that it's conducted entirely within the existing garage building,
Yeah.
so that it doesn't start to take over additional area of the property.
And as far as when that time period is expired, what happens then?
Permit expires.
Permit expires.
Done.
Yeah,
You know,
just
the
done.
use is gone. I mean, if she wants to come back and make another request at that time for something, that would be her option to do that.
Yeah. That seems.
And I think that
Fair.
it would give us, if she wanted to come back and do that, I think it would give us a clearer understanding of the type of business and the type of impacts that it might have, with regard to.
Are you making that as a motion? Will you?
I will make that as a motion.
I'll second it.
Wait a minute. That's my job.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you, Todd, that, preserving, protecting the residential nature of our community is important. But our ordinance has, over the years, allowed home occupations to exist, and they have existed with little impact to those neighborhoods and residential uses.
It just seems to me that this particular circumstance could be misconstrued as saying that this property was originally targeted for this use. And another investor could come along and say, business park's too expensive, new construction costs too much, I can rehab that place and use the garage.
It
And
seems like a crazy risk for somebody to do that if that's the only purpose they had for it, rather than wait for the $200 conditional use permit finding to be done and then make the purchase, which is what normally occurs. That's the investment level
And
there.
I think most of the home occupations that we've granted permits for, they've always come down the line after the residents have
been there a
residents have
long
been
time.
there.
Yeah, and
So-
that's why I just don't want to create a new market that kind of moves in. I'm just always going to be protecting our residential zones.
Well, I mean, again, it's very limited type of use or activity.
But
that
it's one we'd like to encourage,
Well-
just not there, generally speaking.
Well, if it doesn't have any impact on the neighborhood, we have encouraged it. We've provided.
After they've lived there for a while.
Well, we provide the option in our ordinance to.
Mr. Chairman, I'll call a question for a vote.
How about some
What was that
findings?
sentence?
Yeah, we can go to findings.
Yes.
So, in order to approve a conditional use permit, we have to make findings that we have, that are within our ordinance. The first is that the use conforms to the land use or comprehensive plan of the city. And again, this is usually the reflection back on what the ordinance allows or provides for, and in this case, the R2 district does allow home occupations to be a conditional use, and so it is consistent with the land use or comprehensive plan of the city. Use is compatible with the existing neighborhood, and this is one where we believe it will be. The granting of a conditional use permit does require that the use remains residential and primarily as it's worded, is clearly incidental and does not change the character of that neighborhood or property. So
That's the important part of it, yeah.
and third is that the use would not impede the normal and orderly development and improvement in the surrounding area of permitted uses in the zone district. And this is a residential zone district, and other residential uses could be built, have been built in that neighborhood. The adjacent property is vacant, I guess, and would certainly be still suitable for construction of a home. And fourth is that the location and character of the proposed use is considered to be consistent with a desirable pattern of development for the area. The residential use of this area is the desirable pattern of development. Do we all want the residential uses to be, the primary use in the residential district, and these incidental uses of home occupations or whatever, excuse me, would continue to allow the character of the area to be consistent with that residential nature, so. Any other comments, questions by the commission?
Should we read back the motion?
So, the motion is to approve the conditional use request that expires September 30th with the conditions that she provide 3 on-site parking spaces and that the business activity is entirely conducted within the garage building.
That sounds
Okay,
right.
clear, understand?
Yep.
Okay, all those in favor vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. This is now referred on to the city council. The city council will make the final decision on this request. It will come to the city council on our meeting of
May 9th?
May 9th. So, thank you for coming. It was good to have neighbors show up and
Very much so,
express
yeah.
and
Yes.
show their concerns. We appreciate that. Thank you.
And you're not required to stick around for all the rest.
The next request is We'll let these folks.
Yeah,
Move-
just take a
move out.
minute. Here, you can read this letter quick. People are stepping out.
I was just gonna look at, this is the next one?
That's just a letter attached to it.
Oh.
Okay. Next request is a request from Kerry Bowen, a potential purchaser of this property, for a variance to the minimum lot requirements to create a 60 by 200-foot separate lot out of the larger parcel, which is shown on our map within the R1 residential district. Just to be clear, the larger parcel is the full joins property.
Yes.
That's one with the old garage behind there, and the roofing.
The house.
Roofing is showing the garage right now, so it's back here. Okay. I drove around today, I just want to make sure I have my bearings.
Okay. And Hal, you know which property we're talking about?
Yep.
So wait,
Michael?
So
That's-
the community
This
center's
is
over here.
This is
okay.
County Road 7.
okay.
Okay. All right, so this is a public hearing. Carrie, do you have anything you want to add before we, start this? Usually we let the applicant,
Thanks for coming. See you later.
explain the project or explain the application if there's something you want to add.
Kerry Bowen, my name. What we're proposing is just variance for width on County Road 7. There are currently 9 lots in that block or of that area. And there's 53,000 square feet of ground there, which supports 5 lots. We wanted to bring a driveway in off of County Road 7, none from 4th Street, to support the 4 houses, possibly the 5th house there. It would all be within R1 ordinances, not looking for high density or anything like that. Anything that's permissible in your R1 ordinance, we wouldn't exceed that. There is no sewer and water currently to the property, so we'd have to come across the road with the water. Probably enhance the sewer line on the property side. I was handed a letter when I got here concerning some stagnant water that sits on the property. I think that was a result of when the property was actually developed and built, the house was built there. Someone mined some product to backfill or do whatever they were doing there 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But the property has good topography. It drains to the south. It shouldn't hold any water. If water's being held somewhere there, it's probably from adjacent properties collecting there. This property should not hold water on its own. So I just read that now tonight when I got here, but I hadn't seen that before. So, but there's plenty of, if that's a concern, there's plenty of fall to the property. Trying to create 5 individual housing units that are compatible with the neighborhood, and not low end or not high end, mid-range houses for the people that can handle that type of a house. And no, that's not in the nightly rental area, so that's not a consideration at all.
So at this point, your intent is to buy the entire parcel with then further division of that?
Well, it's not really subdividing, it's reorganizing the lots. It's
Right.
within
But
it's
to
within that
create-
area.
To create
I'm
5
guessing-
lots
I'm
on
guessing
this existing
maybe
parcel.
Yeah.
just like this.
And it's supported by the total density or the total area of the property. It's not shy that way. It's shy on footage on Fourth
Right.
and on
What type
Conditional
of
7.
housing are you proposing to put on this?
The single family, that's within your R1 ordinances.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the requirement is for an 80-foot minimum width in
Correct.
the R1 zone district.
And the 4 lots that are on 7th Avenue can meet that requirement, on 4th Avenue, excuse me, can meet that requirement, but it's the one that's on 7th, that's already an existing parcel. It's just within that block there.
And just to look forward at what, if those 4 lots were created on 4th, what would their dimensions be?
Our
They'd
building
be
pad,
80 by 133, and the bottom 2, and 80 by 125 on the top 2. So they'd all meet our minimum requirements.
yeah, the 2 up towards 7 are 10,000 square feet, the 2 to the south of that are 10,400 and 10,800, and the lot in question is 12,200 square feet.
Okay. Commissioners have any questions for Gary?
I just read this quick.
Are there anybody who's speaking against this?
Well,
I'm not
we-
speaking against that, you
we-
just want to ask some questions.
I mean, I want to open it up to public hearing
Yeah.
comments.
What's our usual lot square footage?
10,000.
10,000. Okay.
You can probably hang
What are the setbacks on a residential lot? About 10 feet on the sides?
out. Yeah.
In the lots to the west of it, I believe that's where this letter is written from. Do they meet current lot requirements as well? They have the necessary depth and width?
No. In what ways do they not meet it?
I'm not sure either of them are 10,000 square feet. They're certainly not 120 feet in depth. It's
The existing lots or?
The existing lots have houses on them. I'm assuming
he's
that's where
talking
this,
about the neighboring
where this
lots.
letter came from.
The lots to the west.
Yeah, the lots to the west. They look short.
Yeah. I think they're about 80 feet square is what.
What's that?
The lots to the west are also zoned differently.
Okay.
They're still the same, the dimensional requirements. You're 80-foot square, is that what yours is?
Mine's 80 by 100, Jennifer's is 80 by 80.
Okay, yeah. Mine's 60 by 90, so.
Yeah, and they're all built in the 50s, so pre-zoning.
Yep, they all are legal, non-conforming lots.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I'm just seeing why this lot there has the impact it has if it's turned into a lot, because some of these lots are pretty stubby. The ones to the west, they don't have the usual depth you might normally see.
No, and this is a fragment, this band that creates this lot is kind of stuck between different plats that were done at different times. And so there's a little offset in the middle of that lot, and it's just all kind of a mess.
I'd like to open it up for public open up the public hearing, open up for public comments. So if anybody would like to come up and
Be prepared very well. I got busy this weekend, but my concern is, I'd like to know what kind of houses are gonna go there. I know we probably can't stop that anyway, but my concern to you is that, is this gonna become a rental property, but for people?
well, it couldn't become a
Not legally, but is it-
a seasonal rental. It could be rental
And
property.
can these houses, are they gonna match, are they gonna all be the same, which wouldn't be consistent with what the neighborhood is? I just wanna know, is it gonna look like condominiums, all same, along the, those small lots?
Can I jump in for a second? Yeah, I was going to jump in. It's Pete Greshik, right?
Yep.
Okay, because it didn't introduce
Oh,
himself.
I'm sorry.
But and you live right across the street here, don't
Right.
you?
Yeah.
But we're selling.
Oh.
We can't we can't
That
take
means
a
he can't be
development.
on the planning commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to suggest that we ask if you have any standards. I don't think we as a city can impose any real specific standards about
Well-
appearances. Ours are we're not into
No, and
Siding.
height requirements and.
You know, we
yeah.
have
We've
very
got some
generic
Very
requirements.
generic requirements, yeah. And none of them talk about whether they would be owner occupied or rental. That's something we don't regulate.
Yeah.
Right, and generally speaking, we're careful about having like back and forth at the meetings. But those are good questions that you'd probably want to ask directly.
That can be done. You can build, houses that are all the same.
It could be pretty boring.
There would be no restrictions.
Not from us.
Yeah.
But there's neighbor pressure, that you can, good conversations you can have. Do you want? I'm sorry.
You guys
I'm not
can
trying
talk.
to Go ahead.
Karen.
Pete, I think, Larry's work, they'll be consistent with, they want to all be identical, but they'll live within harmony of the neighborhood there. They're not building, the building pads are like 26 by 60, I believe, is the most we could get.
So most of them they're all two-story structures?
Well, some will be slab on grades, maybe with a bonus from up above the garage or something. To stay in it, yeah, they won't be massive places, and they'll all vary. They won't all have the same color siding or the same color roofing or things like that. Be mixing it up.
So as far as what this is for that different lot, that doesn't affect me, and I don't have a pro or a nay against what he's asking for. I was just concerned about it becoming rental property and not being long-term residents.
The rental.
There's a lot of little kids, and there's some little kids in the area, you start getting an influx of people rotating. I can see that happening, and I'm concerned about it.
The rental rights they have in the R1 zone is they can rent monthly.
Yeah, 31 days.
That's about it.
And we've been really clear about, controlling the vacation rental type use in the residential districts, making sure that, that isn't going to happen. So,
I'm not sure that's what I understood Pete's objection to be, though. You're talking about you'd prefer these to be owner occupied.
Well, it would be nice, yeah, and if they're just gonna be, seasonal people there, and then you start getting friends using it, pretty soon you get a big turnover of people, and that concerns me. I mean, if you can't, it's legal, it's legal.
well, we don't have any controls over whether if somebody buys a property as a seasonal place, they buy it to use it as a long-term rental, or whether they decide to use it as their primary residence. We don't have any qualifications in our ordinance that would control.
Can one person own all four of them?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And how does that become a residence then? If you're,
We have a lot of rental properties in town. I mean, I think that there's a shortage of rental housing as much as.
oh, yeah, I mean, for long-term rental.
Yeah.
It has to be long-term.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's a minimum of 31 days in
Yes.
that area.
Has to be monthly or longer.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Pete.
Anybody else?
I respect Pete's comments because I respect him as a guy that's done a great job in businesses up here.
Neil?
Hello, I'm Neil Hansen, and I guess I'm the unfortunate one who was actually in town of the properties on the west side of the lot, between Jennifer Schultz and Tom Turner. Anyhow, and I'm not against development of the place. I knew something was going to happen when Howard died. I've known the Joynes family most of my life, 3 generations of it, and gonna have to, in the future, work with Mr. Bowen. So I'm not interested in upsetting anybody. But I took a look at I'm assuming of course, the 60 by 200 is what I could call a vacated alleyway, is what it appears to be. An old alley. 60 by 100 or 200 is not real wide. It could potentially put my lot being, near one of the better spots to build on that. I don't know if they want to peer in my bedroom window or not. How close they're gonna be. There's also the power line running down pretty much the middle of that. What's gonna happen with that? Is it gonna stay overhead, gonna be underground? What have you? There's, you know, electric, telephone, cable, broadband, all in there. That's one of my questions. Is it gonna be relocated? Is it going to stay where it is and then build over, under, around, or through it? And
I'm not sure what our easement says about it right now.
yeah, how much would that encroach on the use of the lot?
Yeah. But generally, we would allow someone who's developing the property to pay for the relocation of any of the utilities that are in the way of their development.
I have no clue what the real dimensions are of anything, but I took it upon myself to come up with maybe an alternate configuration, something that's still not going to be without controversy. I suppose it wouldn't make legal lots, but lacking any real information to work off of, so I'm pacing rough property lines and whatnot. And this sort of a configuration might be more, yeah, certainly nicer, better to me. I don't know. Also kind of made a note in the little jog where the wet area is, and that quite easily could have been made by the construction of, they're calling it a wet area, not a wetland, but it actually runs behind the third lot down some as well, but the wettest spot is right behind my pole barn. And it's quite possibly created when my house was built. You know, who knows? There's a drainage through there, and it tends to follow that blue line. Anyhow, I made a few copies of it if you want to pass it around. That's just my worksheet. And this was just about useless for anything.
Just have a quick question. I don't know if you guys even discussed this, but if you establish a value for that fifth lot, has it been offered to these folks? And some, maybe even a CD, they could each take a chunk so that they extend their backyards. Now, I'm just totally throwing this out there because I used to be in real estate, but the thing is, you could end up with longer and lots and more privatized. You know, there's value in the land. We wouldn't, maybe you would still get the value you're looking at of the lot, but you wouldn't have the building opportunity again. But just throwing that out there is a way of kind of create, you'd be able to buy the land, a section from them, and create a buffer, just throwing it out.
Yeah.
Crickets.
Thought of, you know, myself, I'd thought of approaching Howard back when he was still alive. But, that's not an option anymore. And
it seems like it'd mostly be divided between Jennifer
possibly,
and you.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't possibly personally afford
Consider that.
anything right now, but
Okay.
but anyhow.
Can you show me where that power pole, or describe where that power pole is?
Okay. Let's see. Get this right. It would be, I'm going to say 60 feet, 40 to 50 to 60 feet. Well, or it would be on the west side of Howard's driveway. But, so yeah, probably
So is it
40.
behind the garage or alongside the garage?
Before you get to the garage. I would say roughly even with the property line drawn between Jennifer and myself.
So it's running north-south?
Yeah.
Yeah, the power line runs north-south through the whole block.
Somewhere where Jennifer's propane tanks are, somewhere.
We'll see that there's a pine tree at the back that's between Jennifer's and my house, roughly perpendicular straight back. And it feeds power overhead to myself and Jennifer's. And
So this is a lot. Yeah, it's, I don't know. I'm still uncertain where that.
So it's running north and south. How far from the western
power
boundary?
line runs north and south.
But it's going to need to be relocated
Just to,
right now.
just to the west of the existing driveway to Howard's garage.
We don't know any of those details until somebody actually makes a proposal for a structure.
Mhm.
So it's possible that it's fine, it's possible that it's in the way, we don't know.
Are you familiar where that power pole is?
Very.
And can you describe where it is, or can you show us on this?
Probably about 50 feet from the west lot line.
50 feet east of the west lot line.
So 10 feet from the...
Back from 7.
And so, so it would be behind the garage.
No.
So what you see in the picture, the most prominent roof that's inside of the shaded area is not a garage. It's just a open-sided roof
So there's the
with wood
garage
underneath
is
it.
here. The garage is right behind the house.
Yeah, and the power line does not go down as far as where the garage is.
Okay, so it's
on
behind that shed.
It's on the eastern portion of the lot?
Yeah, between the shed and the garage.
Gotcha, okay.
Somewhere
in
back
there.
back in here somewhere.
But running like this?
The
That's what
power
we're
line
saying,
runs,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And it's not a particularly difficult thing to go back in there and set another pole in a different location and run those
Yeah, I
lights.
think it's just helpful to know where that is. Okay, is that, anything else, Neil?
Yeah, I would just, I'd just like to see it stay zoned R1. That one little lot is bordering on RCN zoning. And, I don't know, I'd just like to see that it stays R1 zone.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm just going to clarify with Mike here. There's really nothing to discuss about the creation of these lots that meet conforming. I mean,
I think
nothing that's come up anyway.
You can talk about that. There's really not much for us to talk about there.
There's
I
no,
think it just
no
gives
variances.
us
nor-
a context
Yeah.
of what the larger property future might be. So.
Right, but we're not looking for any permissions. There's nothing for us really to engage in on that.
No, I think one of the reasons why a drawing like Neil provided wasn't the conversation first is because it creates two substandard lots rather than one. Any way you slice it, it's pretty easy to find the area requirements for 5 large residential lots on this property. Dimensionally, it's tricky, but the area requirements, the density is not a trick at all. It's quite a large lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, the 4 lots are a little bit easier. They would almost mirror what it looks like on the other side of 4th Avenue in terms of density.
Can we make suggestions such as what constructions occur there, since this is a substandard width lot, and it would most likely, if there's a construction there, would most likely crowd the properties to the west, because the new properties to the east have the option of positioning themselves where they want to, they can be further away. Can we make suggestions that say, well, if you build there, let's try and preserve at least this amount of setback on the west part of the skinny lot?
What's required now is 10 feet.
Right.
And and on both sides, the east and west. So that leaves 40 feet of width for building on. I think it's tricky to have that conversation without some drawings that show good building sites on the property, because you wouldn't want to move them off of one that creates other problems. But you could make the setback on the west side larger than 10 feet as a part of the variance.
Have you looked at any floor plans for that lot, sort of shotgun style or things like
We
that?
just dealt with the area for the building pad at this point.
Okay.
Within the setbacks that are
Mhm.
in your ordinances now. I don't think that we'd be creating, just the general layout of that lot wouldn't dictate that you'd have a 40-foot wide building necessarily. It probably, neither are the ones on the other side. They're, they're basically 26 by 38 or 40 with the garage on them.
Mhm.
So the idea that we're going to maximize that whole lot doesn't exist, because one, it's not economically feasible to sell it that big. Number two, it doesn't allow for parking and all the other good things that we have to accommodate for it. So, I don't see that site being consumed by a great big large building.
Right.
A narrower structure than the other ones. But, I would, in good faith, try to push it to the east as far as we dared, to give the buffer and plant some trees, and going, just to go back to the power line thing, and that's all secondary stuff there. It's just a bunch of, it's a mess back there.
Power lines generally need about 10 feet, I think.
Well, not
20.
that one doesn't.
Oh.
And it's easy to move around too.
Okay.
So this isn't a main line. The main line is up on County Road 7. That would be very difficult to move. But what's going through the property is not difficult.
We'd create an easement to get it all underground. I'd prefer it underground.
Money, costs money.
Yeah, but you can't have it draping over a building and this and that, so it's gotta be moved to create a utility easement that covers it. Currently, there is no utility easements that I can find a record on the property, period.
Yeah, not surprising.
Who knows when it was
With
installed.
reference to the alley that could have potentially built it in there at one point, there's not a record there either.
No, it's definitely not an alley. It's way too wide for that. It's just this odd remainder between plats.
It's an artifact.
And that there's a section line that goes through there, which is why there's that piece that's off.
I'm going to throw out a suggestion. This is just for, I'm not married to this idea, and maybe there's flaws with it. But what if we said that we approved this with, but set the western setback at a minimum of 15 feet, and then the eastern setback we would allow to be down to 5 feet. So we're not really taking away any building area, but we're saying the setbacks are shifting it to the side. Now it's going to put it closer to those standard lots on the east. At least, it could be closer there. And it would have to work, with whatever power line design comes along, because that power line is going to have to be in that 5-foot area. I just threw that out there.
Can we hold that part of the conversation and see if there's anybody else here that has any public comments before we, get involved too much in our commission conversation? Anybody else?
Dave, what are you?
I'm good now. Pete asked everything. Most of my questions have been answered already, so.
All right, thank
My
you.
biggest concern was permanent residential. 31 days is considered a permanent residential, and I guess I didn't really realize that when we said permanent residential.
All right, then we are going to close it to public comment and have commission conversation and discussion about this.
Okay.
So, with regard to your thought about a greater setback on the west side.
It might mean that if that power line's moved, it's moved more into those larger lots, or maybe just across the property boundary. I don't know where it exactly is even right now.
Well, I think it would probably move into the other side because it's being used to serve the neighbors over there.
Okay, so it could be on that larger side.
I think that you don't need to be concerned too much about where the utility lines get located yet. Those are details that the developer will have to really deal with when they come up with their proposal. And legally, there's no reason why you can't do what you're suggesting and just shift the setbacks.
Oh, it's just a thought.
That's certainly one way of addressing it. The concern about impacting that property line. My thought, I'm not overly concerned with that 10-foot setback. I think it's adequate. You already have, Jennifer's property, her propane tanks are set up against that property line, and she has two large propane tanks that are there, pretty much define where that boundary is already. So it's not as if setting back 15 feet or 10 feet from that is going to create any significant difference. It's not like it's open, and, you know, she's using it to access or something. And behind yours, Neil, I mean, you know, your pole building is right up to the property line almost, and
Yeah, I'm assuming it's at the 10-foot.
yeah,
But
yeah.
No.
I don't even know that there's 10 feet.
Not remotely, and it wouldn't be
Yeah.
required to have 10 feet, an accessory structure like that,
I
but
don't- yeah, I don't know, it's not much.
Yeah.
a couple feet maybe. I mean, these aerial photos are not accurate at that level of detail.
Right, but I don't believe that you know, the pole building has a 10-foot setback.
I'd guess more like 2 or 3.
I would push it to 5,
Yeah, okay, well, whatever, so.
but yeah. It's,
So any other thoughts, commission members? I mean, I like the idea that this is a underutilized piece of property in town that's on city sewer and water that now is potentially gonna be made available for additional residential use. We talked about this whole business of trying to protect our residential areas and, you know, encourage more residential development. This, to me, would help us along those,
Absolutely.
if we saw, you know, 5 new houses on this property, that's significant.
Yeah.
You know, there's so few areas in the city that have access to sewer and water that have the ability to be developed like this. You know, I think this would be something that we could do to address that issue of housing and do it in a way that's, I think, relatively straightforward.
Yeah. And, you know,
I agree. The only thing I would say is it would be nice if we could shift it over a little bit, but I'm not, like I said, I'm not married to the idea if it's really an unorthodox suggestion.
I don't think
I'm
it's
not gonna defend it.
unorthodox. I mean, it certainly falls within their purview to do that. I just don't think it's necessary.
And it's nice because there's not existing residences that have to adjust their viewpoint. Like on the west side, you know, these folks on the east would know what they're getting into with that shorter setback. The developer would know about it and could plan the locations of the buildings in accordance with that. The biggest complicating factor I can think of is a detail that could easily be forgotten because it's not part of our zoning ordinance. And so there'll be a permanent record of it. It'll be
hard
attached
to-
to the property in the recorder's office, but that doesn't mean that somebody that comes and applies for a building permit's gonna
Right.
remember or know.
They're gonna be told what the standard is.
Yeah.
And they're not gonna know that it's, you know.
So it might be difficult to track over time.
Any other comments? If not, I'd welcome a motion.
Yeah. I move that we approve it.
Motion has been made to approve the variance as requested. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There's a second. Any additional comments? Findings that need to be made? Very similar to the conditional use findings, we have requirements for findings regarding a variance. The first finding is that the variance is in harmony with the purpose and intent of the ordinance. Again, clearly, this is a residential zone district. The use of this property would be for residential purposes. The variance would allow residences on this property. Two is that the variance is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and this is really very similar to the first in that the ordinance and the comprehensive plan, although the comprehensive plan is a little bit more expansive on the topic of providing residential areas in the city to be developed. Three is that the proposal seeks to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the zoning ordinance. And again, all these lots would meet the total square footage requirements. They would all be over 10,000 square feet. this lot, I think just because of the, kind of the configuration of it, would be a reasonable use of the property with the variance. For the plight of the landowner is due to circumstances unique to the property, not created by the landowner. Again, it's kind of that jog in the property that is unique to this property that you don't generally find in other areas of the city. And 5, that the variance, if granted, would not alter the essential character of the locality. It's a residential area, these would be residential uses, and which is the general nature of this area. Any additional comments? Hearing none, all those in favor, vote aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. So carry this again, we'll go to the city council on May 9th. You can check with Mike or Patrick regarding the time, but generally they'll be relatively soon after the start of the meeting, 6:30. And the last item on the agenda is the old business of lodging on the first floor in the downtown district. Mike had provided a memo explaining that.
Well, actually, Patrick did.
Oh, okay, it was Patrick's memo. Yes, it was Patrick's memo. I don't know if you've had a chance to read through, but I think it's a good approach to beginning the process.
What did you think about our strategy
let's
to
do a
beat
little-
you up with 2 large public hearings before we got to this, so
Yeah.
that you wouldn't want to
Yeah.
spend any time talking about it?
Yeah. Maybe we should ask them to.
You guys mind? Hey, Neil, do you mind? You head outside. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's hard enough as it is, concentrate. Okay, so this is a new approach, isn't it? Is this in your new role as communications director?
Special projects, communications.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, interesting. So, how? First of all, just from my own understanding, how is it that which topics wind up in your court? How do we? I understand the clerk's role, but
Administrator.
administrator.
It's clear how much you understand.
Clearly, yeah.
Explain it to me. Explain it to me. I'm going to say.
So wait,
something,
all right.
on
Let's
me.
clarify how
from what
things
I've
end up
observed.
in Pat's role.
Yeah.
Patrick gets assignments from me.
From you, okay.
Yeah, but I'm open to suggestions. My vision for his position is that any issue where we think it's valuable to have an interaction with the public, some sort of engagement, that I'd like him to be involved in that, or just to be in charge of that.
So this is sort of an intermediate step between what we've had and going full on into consultant-driven
Yes.
visioning things.
Part of the thought process behind the position that we filled here was we have a lot of local skills and expertise in doing what we've regularly hired consultants to do on our behalf, and that we could internally, at least for some of these scale of projects, handle it ourselves. And that not only can we, but we want to build this in as something we do a lot more regularly, and that it becomes habitual.
Well, I didn't see anything in that proposal that seemed out of line.
No, I think that's completely appropriate to go out and start to question, business owners and.
Well, we can't make a decision until we get the results of the people.
Right, I think we're just trying to.
We're just wasting time talking about it at this point.
We're just asking, is this the process we want to use? We
wants to go home.
want Patrick to go out and ask these questions.
All right. Well, I'm in favor of following the process of all the business owners, what they want.
So,
What are we asked to do here tonight regarding this concept?
well, we're just
Turning Patrick loose.
Jim,
to,
what's your?
we're floating it past you.
idea on this?
He's just reading it.
Didn't you talk to me about this one time?
Yeah, I talked to the P&J about it.
Okay.
Just to, procedurally, what are we doing here tonight? We told you at your last meeting that we would bring a strategy to this meeting as to how we intended to address this issue. So that's what we're looking at, is our proposed strategy. We're asking you about it. You don't have to take any action on, but we're just talking about the strategy. We want to know if you think we're on the right track, and I'm hearing yes, you think we're on the right track. We also wanted to give you an opportunity to think about the character of the questions we were going to ask, or maybe even give us specific questions you'd like to ask, something that you'd like to know in order to help make the decision. So our intention is to do all this engagement between now and the next meeting, which would be the first Wednesday in June, and also do the research on what other cities, and we've already started that, what other cities are doing along these lines, and any other sort of literature that's out there, and bring you some options based on our research and our findings from the survey.
One of the things I would like to suggest, though, is when you're doing research on other communities, that you somehow reach out to some small resort-type communities. It may be outside of Minnesota, too.
Yeah.
That, have experience with the same kind of issue, because the issues are more significant in small resort communities, I think.
Yeah, where we've been looking is just generally, is the issue covered in literature at all? This idea of a, what do we call it? The
first floor lodging and retail.
The critical mass of retail.
Yeah.
Is this critical mass concept covered? And there is some literature out there, at least, to give us a little bit of guidance. And then other similarly sized communities that have central shopping districts, and do they have some rules about it, on how do they treat it? So,
Yeah. I mean, I read through the stuff that you had passed out at the last meeting, Jim, and I thought that there were good articles, but I didn't think they were particularly aligned with the issue here in terms of, Ann Arbor doesn't strike me as Grand Marais. The nature of an urban community is much different than a place like Grand Marais, and that's why I think it's really.
Well, you might want to set what the parameters would be as a population base, because Ann Arbor is a tourism economy.
Well,
too.
but it's 2 orders of magnitude larger than us, so
Right.
that's why it may not be a good fit. Why are we looking at other cities? It's not that they've experienced exactly what we've experienced and they've got our solution that we should just do. It's because if we find 10 other cities that have dealt with this issue in any way, they'll have an idea for us to consider.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So we're just brainstorming ideas by looking at how other people have dealt with it. We'll still have to make our own determination as whether we think that strategy is a good fit with what we've heard from the people here and what we think the issue is.
Now, while this conversation is going on, this process is going on, what is our status for requests for sidewalk frontage lodgings?
They're open right now. So the city council did hear your suggestion that they consider an interim ordinance to give us time to study that, and they decided not to do that. So right now, if someone did come in, well, first of all, they may not need a permit at all. If this is just changing a use in an existing structure, it's legal to do this first floor lodging. So time-wise, we'll come, again, we're hoping to have actual recommendations for you to consider in the beginning of June. If you like those recommendations, then we'll come back in the July meeting with a public hearing and a draft ordinance. And then in July, the city council could begin to do that, 2 readings in July, and then it would be early August when it would actually take effect. That's if no complications arise that might push that schedule
What
out.
are the kind of questions you're going to put on the survey?
Check the memo, which we handed to Jim, so I don't have in front of me.
I can.
These are some of the questions.
Yeah, please do.
What do you like about first floor lodging as a permitted use in the core downtown waterfront zone? That would be question 1. And what are your concerns about first floor lodging as a permitted use in the core downtown waterfront zone?
Reasonable.
Jim, you have a question? Go ahead. Yeah.
If you drop the survey cold on most downtown merchants in Grand Marais, they're going to go, what the hell are you talking about? If you do some of the research that's suggested first and begin the discussion, then maybe people will appreciate the issue. But I don't think most folks in downtown Grand Marais right now grasp what the issue is really all about.
I would agree. I think that would be a hard question for some business owners to respond to.
So can we put the research in front of the survey, timeline-wise?
I can appreciate the idea of trying to educate folks before we ask for their feedback. I think we generally like that strategy because informed feedback is much more useful for you when you're going to make a decision. In this case, we don't want to convince people there is an issue. We want to ask them about their current existing perceptions about what other people have brought up. And if nobody has any concerns or knows anything about it, I think that's also useful information for you to consider how to address this or if to address this. And so,
On the other hand, we are the planning commission, and it's our job to try and be in front of these ideas.
just let's imagine that we take this survey and we get 10 people that have actually been talking about this a lot, are concerned, share a long list of concerns with us, and 30 people that say we don't know what you're talking about, and 5 people that say we like first floor lodging. I mean, we're not taking a referendum here. You don't have to go with the results based on numbers. What we're trying to do is gather information for you. And if what that information says is that there's not a preponderance of people concerned about it, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be concerned about it.
Right.
That just means they're not concerned about
Well,
it.
they're busy working, you know.
But if they don't notice the issue, then is it an issue? Why we're asking them is because we want to try and figure out, if you're going to regulate this, what are the aspects of it that people are concerned about that you need to regulate? And so we can look at other cities and how they've regulated it, but we don't then know, if nobody here is concerned about any of those things, we wouldn't use that tool, And I'd hate to go and show people things they should be concerned about and then ask them if they're concerned, if you know what I mean.
Well, one approach might be to go to something like the downtown retail group meeting that, is held regularly, and at least if you want to present the survey to them at that, and hand it out, it might be a way to preface it a little bit with, the planning commission is working on this, and, we appreciate your, thoughtful, input on, not to necessarily lead them, but to let them know that we're looking for their comments or thoughts.
As a community, too, we tend to treat almost everything as a referendum. So when we go through and ask these questions, people are going to want to know what the counts are. And it won't necessarily be a count of what people feel on this particular topic. It may necessarily be a count of who's even talking about it. And I don't know exactly what information that actually gives us when someone hasn't even been considering it. I don't think that necessarily means it's not a problem.
No, it doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean it's not a problem.
Yeah.
It just means that they're not perceiving a problem.
Right.
And you've already heard from a few people about problems that they perceive.
Right.
That's useful information for you when you think about your approach on what you might regulate.
So sorry, Hal. What we're discussing here is, how does this survey thing and what are the impacts of it other than achieving its goals? It does send ripples out. It is a form of information. It does become sort of a consensus gathering or a vote gathering tool. So I would just say, let's be careful of that. Let's not make this a thermometer bar graph. This has to be more about, even if you are introducing the subject. I mean, as opposed to what Mike said, you don't want to walk up to someone and say, you should be concerned about this. What are your thoughts? But when you are presenting it to someone, you say, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah,
Do you know we're talking about it?
Yeah, I think to let people know that we're interested in receiving their feedback, because we think that this is an important issue, and not necessarily, we want to keep it the tone neutral so that we're not influencing that. And like anything, there's a starting point.
Yeah.
And
Right.
this
So
is
Patrick's
the
actually-
starting point.
Patrick's actually designed some
what input do
introductory
you-
information that goes with the survey, kind of a table setting, if you will. And our struggle is to do that in a way that informs but doesn't lead.
Right.
And we've also been thinking about the types of questions we might ask, not like what is the question, but what style of question is it, and how do we get an answer. So for instance, these two are completely open-ended. It's not multiple choice. There's really no way for us to even say whether this person is for or against unless they specifically say it.
Right.
So we're not going to be reporting back 30 people are for and 10 are against. We're going to be reporting back, here's here's a list of things that people like about it, and here's a list of things that people don't like about it. It won't even be attached.
I want to ask Jim Boyd a question. What about wasn't this discussion coming up with our downtown people? Could you report on what?
I think how that they understand the concerns. But since I'm talking, Mike has been a student of theory of communications, and you're absolutely right. You don't want to see the cloud, so to speak. But I would suggest one other thing to consider, and that is that the lodging part of this is just an emerging issue. The larger issue really is preserving retail.
Yeah.
That's the core issue, retail and dining. The threat could be lodging, the threat could be large box stores, the threat could be fire.
Engineering testing facilities.
Anything.
Whatever that is.
The real core concern is protecting the critical mass of dining and retail in Grand Marais.
Yeah, the interaction between that and all the services that support them, whether it be lodging and everything else, instead of developing an imbalance.
So we've been, when we, the limited information I've seen from other small cities, I asked the question from our perspective, which is retail threatened by lodging, and how do you deal with that? A lot of times the answer is not really related to lodging as much as it's related to retail, like you're saying.
Sure.
And so I think you're going to get some examples and options that deal with the lodging issue, but don't really talk about it from a lodging perspective.
When you're gathering this information and you're going to each business owner, I think it says you're going to do that. Do you go to Tim 15 times? Because he's got, no, I'm just kidding. I mean, we've got multiple properties. Do you approach him once?
My intention is to go to each business, and we're looking at this from the perspective of of the tenants who are there or the property owner, but to go physically to the businesses. So I'm not totally sure about the status of all these properties, but I'll go in, find out who's operating the business and who pays the bill for the public utilities, and that will be the information that you're getting.
We probably won't talk to Tim at all. We'll talk to
And
Beth and
yeah.
Kelsey
Yeah.
and Dan, so we don't need to talk to Tim.
I'll be out of the loop.
We'll talk to Scott.
I'm still kind of
All right,
fixated on
there's
this
nothing
potential
more we
for this to
can do
become like
here.
a vote.
Yeah.
Way too
Chit-chatting.
early in the process.
That's why we're
I
asking
make a motion to
questions.
adjourn. I'm a tired guy. I had a hell of a tough couple of days in D.C.
Why?
I damn near didn't get here last night because the problem with the under fuselage of the commuter airplane broke off.
That's
Yeah.
frightening.
That's
Lovely.
It was nothing. The pilot said it'll just drop on the ground.
We don't need that part anyway. Don't
Well,
worry. There's more of those.
let's just say that it's a work in progress, and we'll take all this conversation into heart when we develop it more. We'll probably even sit down with Mr. Boyd over here and see if we can't think about a good way to approach people that doesn't.
I made a motion to adjourn. Is anybody second it?
Nobody did yet. So.
No, nobody did.
Oh, we heard
What?
Nobody did yet.
We still have a quorum.
Thanks, Hal.
Thanks, Al.
Thanks.
No worries.
All right. We are adjourned.
There we go.
Now. Yeah.
That's leadership right there.